What if the biggest change happening inside Iraq right now isn't political at all? What if the real story has been quietly unfolding underneath the headlines? Inside trade systems, banking reforms, oil revenue mechanisms, airports, international agreements, and infrastructure projects that most people never even notice. Because tonight, we're not talking about rumors. We're not talking about hype. And we're definitely not talking about fantasy predictions. We're talking about real documented developments happening across Iraq right now. Developments that, when connected together, paint a very different picture than most people realize. And if you stay with me until the end of this video, you'll understand why many long-term observers believe Iraq is entering one of the most important transition phases in its modern history. Welcome back to Hidden Globe. If you enjoy deep analysis without the noise, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because this story is moving faster than ever. Now let's begin. The petrodollar mechanism. A high-level, technical committee established under Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani has officially begun working on a structured mechanism for calculating and distributing petrodollar entitlements. Now, I know that sounds technical, but stay with me because this matters more than most people realize. For over 20 years, Iraq has struggled with one major unresolved issue. How should oil revenue be distributed between Baghdad, Kurdistan, and the provinces? This dispute has delayed major legislation like the hydrocarbon law and Article 140 for decades. But now something different is happening. Instead of vague promises, officials are discussing actual formulas, past entitlements, present entitlements, future entitlements. That means they're not just debating politics anymore. They're building the financial architecture required to make the system operational. And that changes everything. Because real economic transformation doesn't begin with announcements. It begins with mechanisms. And mechanisms are now being built in real time. Why this is different? I've watched Iraq developments for years. And one thing becomes very clear over time. The most important changes usually happen quietly, not during the loud political moments, but during the technical meetings nobody pays attention to. That's why this committee matters, because Iraq's biggest economic bottleneck has always been the lack of a stable revenue-sharing structure. Without that foundation, long-term investment becomes difficult. But now, Iraq appears to be building that foundation piece by piece. Is the issue solved completely? No. But is Iraq moving differently than before? Absolutely. And that distinction matters. The tier system explained. Now let's move to another major development. This week, Iraq officially activated something called the TIR system. And this is a very big deal. TIR stands for an international transport system backed by the United Nations that allows goods to move across borders without repeated customs inspections at every crossing point. In simple terms, a truck leaving Baghdad can move through multiple countries with streamlined documentation and fewer delays. That may sound simple, but economically it's massive, because for decades, Iraq has struggled to function as a major international trade corridor. Now, the country is trying to change that. This week, Iraq officially issued active TIR cards to companies for international transport operations. Not proposed, not discussed, issued. That means Iraq is actively integrating into global trade logistics. And when you connect that to the Development Road Project, the Port of Al-Faw, and regional trade expansion, you start seeing the bigger picture. Iraq is trying to become a logistics hub connecting Asia, the Gulf, and Europe. Iraq is building an alternative economy. For decades, Iraq depended almost entirely on oil exports. That created vulnerability. Any disruption in energy prices or shipping routes could damage the entire economy. But now Iraq is pushing toward diversification, trade routes, transportation systems, infrastructure projects, air cargo networks, industrial investment. The goal is clear: build an economy that can survive beyond oil alone. And the TIR system is one major step in that direction, because modern trade requires modern infrastructure, and Iraq is finally building it. The International Trade Center message. This week, the International Trade Center, a global organization connected to the United Nations and World Trade Organization, delivered a very direct message to Iraq: accelerate. Not continue slowly, accelerate. Officials acknowledged that regional instability and pressure on trade routes are creating serious economic challenges. But they also said this crisis creates an opportunity for Iraq to expand non-oil exports, strengthen agriculture, increase domestic production, and deepen integration with international trade systems. And one phrase stood out: flexible, transparent, and rules-based trade environment. That language matters, because international investors, banks, and financial institutions look for exactly those conditions before committing serious capital. In other words, the systems Iraq is building today are the systems required for large-scale international investment tomorrow. Nasiriyah International Airport. Now let's talk infrastructure, because another major development happened this week. Officials announced that Nasiriyah International Airport is entering its final stages before opening. But here's the important part. This airport is not just about passenger flights. It includes air freight facilities, logistics warehouses, and commercial cargo infrastructure. That means Iraq isn't simply building airports. It's building trade infrastructure, and the location matters. Southern Iraq connects directly to major oil regions, trade routes, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and the Development Road Corridor. This is strategic positioning, and when combined with ports, highways, and rail systems, Iraq begins transforming into something much larger than an oil exporter. It becomes a regional logistics hub, air corridors, and regional connectivity. At the same time, Iraq and Jordan are discussing new international air corridors. The goal? Increase international transit traffic through Iraqi airspace. Again, this sounds technical, but it's part of a much bigger strategy. Land routes, sea routes, air routes, all being connected simultaneously. This is not random development. This is coordinated infrastructure expansion. And when multiple systems begin activating together, that's when transformation becomes visible. The young Iraq factor. There's another important factor many people overlook. Iraq is one of the youngest countries in the world. A massive percentage of the population is under 30 years old. That generation wants jobs, technology, investment, connectivity, opportunity. And the government knows it cannot delay modernization forever. That's why Iraq's newer leadership increasingly focuses on infrastructure, digital systems, banking modernization, and international integration, because the pressure for economic growth is enormous, and countries with young populations often move very quickly once the foundations are finally in place. The political signals. Now let's move to the political side. This week, Kurdish leadership held major meetings in Baghdad, involving multiple political and ethnic groups, Shia leaders, Sunni representatives, Kurdish officials, minority communities, and the message coming out of those meetings was surprisingly constructive. Support for stability, support for cooperation, support for moving forward. Why does this matter? Because political unity reduces investment risk, and investment risk is one of the biggest factors international markets watch closely. If Baghdad and Erbil continue moving toward cooperation instead of confrontation, that creates a much stronger environment for long-term economic reforms, especially regarding oil revenue agreements and the hydrocarbon law. Why this matters globally? Here's the big picture. Iraq is now building oil revenue mechanisms, international trade systems, airports, logistics hubs, air corridors, banking modernization, trade integration frameworks, infrastructure corridors, diplomatic cooperation, all at the same time. That is not coincidence. That is national restructuring. And while challenges still exist, corruption, bureaucracy, instability, the direction has become increasingly clear. Iraq is trying to position itself as a modern economic gateway between regions, and the pace appears to be accelerating. So what should you take away from tonight? Simple. The changes happening inside Iraq are real, not hype, not fantasy, not internet rumors. Real infrastructure, real systems, real agreements, real international integration. Does that mean everything happens tomorrow? No. Structural transformation takes time. But what we are seeing now is something different from the past. For years, Iraq talked about potential. Now it's starting to build operational systems that support that potential. And that's the key difference. The architecture is finally taking shape. Thank you for watching Hidden Globe. If you enjoyed this deep analysis, make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video with someone following Iraq's economic future. And remember, real change is usually quiet before the world finally notices it. Stay informed, stay prepared, and I'll see you in the next video.